Good afternoon, everybody. Uneducated Economist here. So in my recent videos, we've talked a lot about private equity firms. And these private equity firms, what they do is they buy out companies and then force them into bankruptcy, liquidating their assets. They do a leverage buyout where they take out a loan against the assets of that particular company, and then they buy up the controlling shares of that company and then start making decisions that force that company into bankruptcy. Now, of course, that's not what they say they do. I mean, they say that they come into these troubled companies and attempt to try and make them a viable company again, but we know better than that. Private equity firms are more about doing the leverage buyout and then the liquidation of the assets that come with it. And we're seeing that kind of take place right now with SeaWorld. And, we did a video on that just recently. But then I came across another article talking about how Virgin Airlines has now been bought out by Bain Capital. And of course, same statement, we're going to try and save as many jobs as we can. This is coming from Bain Capital, but we know better than that. And I can only assume here in about a month, we're going to start seeing the articles talking about how Virgin Airlines is going to be liquidating all their assets. And I'm just assuming that, but that's just par for the course when it comes to these private equity firms. One of the other articles that I came across with that I found was pretty interesting was a Bloomberg article talking about how private equities now have their foot in the door to the 401k plans out there. Now, these 401ks, these are like the workplace retirement plans that are familiar with a lot of people. And typically these guys, when your 401k is invested into like safer kind of return investments. Private equity is very risky. I mean, these guys are doing leverage buyouts. They're reaching farther out there on the risk when it comes to like investments. But the administration has opened the door for these private equity firms to now, start diving into these 401k plans, or at least get the investors of 401k's to participate with these private equity firms. I can just see this being a disaster at some point in the future, but it seems to be in the works right now. One of the other things that I was reading about, foreclosures, or at least delinquencies. So I've been hearing a lot about how mortgage delinquencies are now at their lowest level that they've been in 10 years. And, this isn't surprising. I mean, we came off of a record high amount of delinquencies 10 years ago. It would only make sense that we would hit record low delinquencies for the last 10 years. But something that I thought was kind of interesting that a lot of people I don't think are thinking about is that when you have a stream of delinquencies, like no matter what, like the economy is doing, like whether it's a good time or bad time or whatever, you have delinquencies taking place. You have foreclosures that are in the works at any given time. And when this whole lockdown took place and the economy was shutting down, and the administration and the Treasury and the Fed came up with the idea of forbearance, where you could postpone making your payments on your mortgages, well, then you're not going to be delinquent. You see? And so, like this stream of delinquencies that would typically be in the pipeline working their way towards foreclosure got dammed, right? Got dammed off, and the amount of delinquencies after that dropped dramatically. But here's the problem. At some point, they're going to pull those forbearances out, where the forbearance period ends. And the people who had trouble making their payments before the forbearance are going to continue to have trouble making their payments afterwards. And so all the built up energy of all these people who were in forbearance, who should have been going delinquent, but they pretty much got the stay of execution because of this forbearance, are going to come flooding into the system. So I'm assuming that record low delinquencies are probably going to be met by record increase in delinquencies. I wouldn't say it's going to necessarily go up to record levels of delinquency, which it very well could, but it's certainly going to start flooding into the system all the past delinquencies that have never made it into the system on account of the forbearance period that was taking place. Does that kind of make sense? And we're already seeing some of the news articles coming out. Like I found one talking about how student loan delinquencies, and that there's going to be a wave of them coming in after the deferment or the forbearance period ends. And so same thing, all these student loans who would typically be making their payments or not making their payments, but the delinquency on those at least for the data point of view, has been postponed. So a lot of these student loans are no longer considered delinquent because of the deferment or forbearance period of these student loans. And at some point, again, when they lift those programs, those delinquent, the deferment or the forbearance programs, once they lift those, there's going to be a flood of delinquencies coming in because these people were not making their payments anyway, right? The stream of them. I mean, sure, a lot of them were, and I'm sure a lot of them found this period to be like, a chance for them to, get ahead on their bills or maybe catch up on some of their finances, but a lot of them haven't. And instead of like working those people through the system, they pretty much dammed them up, and they're going to flood through. And I have a feeling that a lot of this is going to start taking place in September. I mean, when it comes to the forbearance period, you had 3 months to 6 months up to a year that you could like postpone your payments on your house, and then they would work those later on into the end of the loan, or work out some sort of deal so that you could start paying back the missed payments. But during that time is the critical point, because that's where all these forbearances that typically, or all these delinquencies that would typically be occurring in the data, have been pretty much masked over by this forbearance that has taken place. And so again, once the forbearance period ends, it's going to be like a flood of delinquent borrowers, hitting the system all at once. Anyway, I'll leave links down in the article or down in the description for these articles. Uneducated Economist. You guys let me know.